And welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Bench with Bubba, episode 389, recapping what might be one of the crazier, wilder MLB trade deadlines we've had in a long, long time, and a lot of fantasy implications that come along with it. So we're going to break it all down. You can find me on Twitter at BDentric. If you give a rate and review of the podcast, we truly appreciate it. But to help me break this down is a great guest, first-time guest for the show. You can find his work over at Yahoo Fantasy Sports. He does the fantasy football podcast for Yahoo Sports. And he's on Twitter at Scott_Pianowski. Scott, how we doing, man?
I'm doing great, Bubba. How are you?
Good. I appreciate you joining me today on a Friday evening to recap just pure craziness that took place the last couple days.
Yeah, many different years I've been on the trade deadline detail. This year I'm actually not. I don't have to write anything for it, which I think I'm kind of glad for, because I think it might take me 3 days to unpack it. And there's been deadlines that have been duds. And we know some sports things don't happen. In the NFL, there's generally not a lot of activity at the deadline. There are NBA trading deadlines that are, smaller, and some of them are bigger. In hockey, it's the same way. And I think what finally happened this year, because there's a lot of striation in baseball, right? There's a lot of teams that know they're not in the playoff hunt. And there's even teams like Seattle that are in it. They're in it, but they're acting like they're not in it. And a lot of times people say, well, why should the Pirates hold on to anything? Or why should, the Cubs are rebooting, the Tigers aren't going anywhere. This seemed like the year where every team that was to the north of it was like, yeah, we should really be doing something. And every team to the south of it is like, yeah, we should really be selling off things that we can't keep, or things that aren't going to be part of our next contending team. So it's almost like if you told me Rob Manfred said, hey, we're going to give every team like a $5 million bonus for every trade you make. Go out and make a bunch of trades. So this was crazy. I'm still trying to unpack it. I don't know who's going to be closing in probably like 17 cities right now, it feels like. But it was fun. I mean, when things change and we have new players and new situations, that's always fun and interesting. I mean, depending on who you root for. I'm a Red Sox fan. My season is always defined by the Yankees not doing well. So I wasn't thrilled to see them get some pieces kind of cheaply, I thought. But it was fun. The bottom line is this. I mean, trading is fun in fantasy baseball. Trading is fun in real baseball. And I can't remember a deadline that was as active as what we just saw over the last few days.
No, it was absolutely crazy because, I've done fantasy. I've been covering fantasy for a few years now. You've been doing it for quite a bit longer, but I've been following baseball for a long, long time. And I don't remember anything. I was a fan again. I didn't even really, the fantasy stuff's fun. We're going to talk about that, but I'm just sitting there, like you said, teams are actually going for it, which was fun to see. And then teams that are rebuilding, like if you're the fan base of the Cubs, I understand how it kind of stings, but look at what you did. You got a good head start on things. There's still some things to happen, but all in all, you didn't just, lose guys as free agency and have to start from scratch. Like you got something started, which will be promising. The Nationals just completely imploded everything. Also, the only team that really didn't do anything, and it's still head scratching, is the Rockies. No idea what they're doing in Colorado. So that's
I thought for sure Trevor Story would have a new address. That John Gray was somebody I know a lot of teams would be in. Everybody always wants pitching, and I think we've always wondered what John Gray would do if he was removed from the Colorado element. So to see Story not go anywhere, and I know that the shortstop market wasn't quite what people expected. A lot of teams don't need shortstops, and a lot of teams went out and got shortstops even when we didn't expect it. I didn't. The Trey Turner thing with the Dodgers kind of caught me flat-footed. I didn't think that was going to happen. But Story could play third base. Story could play second base. A team's incumbent shortstop could move. Yeah, that's one reason why I thought it was great. It was one of the later moves. And I know you always have Giants stuff. I assume you're a Giants fan. At least somebody who had a Will Clark jersey behind him. One of my favorite players growing up.
Yep.
One of the great moves for them. I mean, I think with getting Kris Bryant, other than the fact that he's just a really good hitter and he's at a good age, who knows what happens after this year with his contract, but they can play Kris Bryant all over the field. And that gives them flexibility. That gives them roster flexibility, lineup flexibility, defensive flexibility, and the way baseball is structured these days. I just love having those guys. I mean, heck, I think it's great that the Red Sox have Kiki Hernandez, and the guy hits 230. Kris Bryant is back to being like an 135 OPS plus player. He's back to being an all-star caliber player. And after seeing what the Dodgers did, it was just good. I think the Giants have been. I've kind of become a fan of the 2021 Giants. It's helped that I've had shares of Gossman, I've had shares of Alex Wood, I've had shares of DeSclafani. I don't know how long those guys are going to pitch as well as they pitched, but I was really hoping the Giants would be players. Now they can't match what the Dodgers did is really hard to match. But hey, the Giants are still there with that big run differential. They're right in the middle of what's going to be, I think, the best pennant race in baseball. And nobody, I don't care how great your pitching is, nobody wants to be in that coin flip game. So I was satisfied to see the Giants make a play. They weren't the quote unquote winners of this deadline per se, but to get Kris Bryant, I thought was really a great ad for them.
Yeah, you nailed the point that I liked about it the most, and some other Giants fans I've talked to is the Giants needed right-handed power, so he fits that mold, and he fits the mold you said that epitomizes the Giants this season. He can play all over the place, and that's one thing the Giants have done. Is you look at the Wilmer Flores of the world, even Lamont Wade Jr., first base, outfield, left-handed bat. Like these guys move all over the place, and it's exactly the perfect Giants player for this season, the way they're building things. So
I think they were hoping Tommy LaStella was going to be like that too, and unfortunately he's been hurt just about the entire season. But they were hoping that maybe he could bounce around as well.
Yep, that's the plan, and he's on rehab, and he got a setback, so we'll see how that plays out. Belt's supposedly coming back soon, but his injury sounded pretty bad, so we'll wait and see. But yeah, it's a big move for the Giants, and there's a lot of moves, and like you said earlier, is we don't know where everything's going to land on this. It's kind of pure speculation. This finished 2 hours ago, hour and a half ago. Everything's the dust is still not settled yet, and we're just gonna give our best assumptions on this because especially the reliever situation. I had a bunch of people already asking me, Scott. I'm like, I don't know. See what they do this weekend. Like, it's a complete disaster. At least you don't have to put fab bids in until Sunday night, hopefully. So just wait and see there. But we'll start in LA. They made the big splash on Wednesday night, and they went and acquired Max Scherzer, who we knew was out there. That was pretty much a given. He said he was going west. That's what he wanted. That was kind of the done deal. You mentioned Trea Turner being a surprise, big surprise. The Nats did say everybody but Soto was available. I think we kind of didn't think Trea Turner was available, but he was. So he goes, a couple of prospects, Kyber Ruiz, Josiah Gray, and a couple others. So some of us thought it was light. Prospects I'm not really worried about on this show too much. That's a whole nother thing. Scherzer, Trea Turner, obviously great fits. How do you think this affects, I guess, because you're going to keep playing them in fantasy, how do you think this affects the rest of the Dodgers situation offensively that already had a lot of moving parts?
Yeah, it's fascinating. My friend Joe Sheehan, who writes the great Joe Sheehan newsletter, put out something earlier today. And one of the centerpieces was this big Dodgers trade, which is still, of course, I think we all know is going to go down as the biggest move just on paper. Just when a guy like Scherzer, a walk-in Hall of Famer, and Trea Turner, legitimately an all-star, when they change in one deal, it's a big move. And Joe said if he was going to set up the Dodgers lineup when everybody's healthy, he'd have Cody Ballinger batting eighth. Part of it because he wants to separate the lefties, doesn't want to have two lefties in a row, but still, just think about that. Cody Ballinger was the National League MVP in 2019, and now I don't know if the Dodgers will play it that way, but I mean, well, Mookie Betts isn't going to hit eighth. Justin Turner's not going to hit eighth. I'm sure Trea Turner's not going to hit eighth either. So this lineup, the depth of this lineup is overwhelming, and it's going to be nicely balanced, lefty and righty. Max Muncy's had a great comeback season. I really wish I had the gumption to go after him. I got a little bit spooked by what he did last year, and I know it was just 60 games, but it was hard to know. What 60 games am I supposed to take seriously, and what 60 games am I supposed to laugh off? I guess Max Muncy was the 60 games I was supposed to laugh off. But and I think the Dodgers, I don't really want to talk about this much, but I think they wanted to wash their palate of Trevor Bauer, and you got to figure he's probably done for the season. So Scherzer steps into that role. Now they can, in a playoff series, they can roll out in whatever order, assuming Kershaw's healthy. They'll have Kershaw, they'll have Buehler, they'll have Scherzer, they'll have Urias. That's pretty freaking nasty. Now, of course, they have to win the division, because if they don't, then they get to the coin flip game, and then one shot deal, anything can happen. Your starting pitcher doesn't have it, or you run into a buzzsaw on the other side, and then you go home and you play golf all winter. But the depth of this Dodgers lineup just blew me away. I mean, they really have everything right now, and if they were to win the division, I think they're clear World Series. I don't think I'm saying anything revolutionary here, but if they win the division, they have to be the obvious World Series favorites. If they don't, then they have to roll the dice like everybody else in that one-shot deal, and then that really changes the math of it.
Yeah, I'm with you. It gets really interesting. Like, as a Giants fan, I do a lot of tongue-in-cheek comments, especially on Twitter, where I'm just like, I respect the snot of the Dodgers. I've told a lot of Dodger fans, like, it's hard not even to not like them anymore. Betts and Buehler, how do you not like these guys? So it's not like the old day Giants Dodgers where you just hated them all. But I told them, I said, if they're building the best wild card team in baseball. That's what I'm trying to give myself hope that you're building the best team. And like you said, then it's going to be tough. Do you really need three aces? You don't, unless you're going to play 2-inning, 3-inning roles with those guys. But I'm with you. If they're in a regular series, it is tough to go against them. It is ridiculous. And Vlad Sedler also tweeted out last night his idea of a Dodgers lineup, and he had Bellinger batting eighth in a platoon with AJ Pollock.
Right. Yeah, I think she might have mentioned that too. Yeah, that's crazy. That's great. That's crazy. And let's also remember one other thing that's a big part of a lot of these teams is right now Turner has COVID. Right now Kershaw's on the IL. The Red Sox went and got Kyle Schwarber. He may not be back for several weeks. There's a lot of injury situations. We really can't appraise where the Mets are at until we know what's up with Jacob deGrom. And if we've learned anything from deGrom this year, even when he's back, we don't know when the next shoe is going to drop with him. This has been, I don't have a great reason why there's been so many injuries this year. Obviously, the COVID situation is unusual to the last two seasons, and so that's part of it. But there's been, it seems like, and I know teams are more proactive. If a guy is maybe borderline, should we disable him or not? Should we IL him or not? It seems like maybe teams just take the prudent approach, get a healthy body in here, and you go for the load management. But it feels like there's a lot of what's tied to these teams and their fortunes is who's going to be healthy and who can we count on when the pennant races are going on in September. I mean, I guess they're going on right now, to be honest. A win now means as much as a win anytime. But, we don't know. Is Clayton Kershaw going to be Clayton Kershaw in October or not? I mean, who knows? Maybe he won't even be active in October. I mean, so a lot of that is going to be part of how we appraise things as we go forward.
Yeah, and like you mentioned, it is interesting to see all these kind of injured players dealt already. And I was the dummy that didn't realize it, or just totally passed me by. But there's no August waiver wire trade deadline this year. Right. So maybe guys are just saying, you know what, we're going to reach for them now, see what we can do, because instead of seeing if they're healthy and doing the waiver deal, and that might have a little impact on it as well. So
I prefer that. I don't like. In my fantasy leagues, I don't like trade deadlines that are really close to the end of the season because it just encourages people who have no chance to make, screw it, I don't care anyway. Here, have these three pieces, and True. I hate to see the people who didn't impact the season on the field impact the season in the trade. So I like the fact that baseball is at least saying, okay, you're going to have to make the decision far further from the finish line, and you're going to have to do more speculating. And there's going to be some teams caught in no man's land where they're not really sure what to do. And again, I know the Mariners are getting killed for what they did. And I can see both sides of it. On one hand, yes, they are cosmetically in the race. On the other hand, even if they were to make the playoffs, I don't think anybody thinks they have any upside. So why not build for a better future and try to have a great team in 2 or 3 years rather than just squeak into the playoffs now? So I can see, I think they're getting maybe unfair. And look, they traded Kendall Graveman. I mean, he's a good relief pitcher. There's a million great relief pitchers who pop it. He's a failed starter who turned himself into a great relief pitcher. I mean, those guys literally are on every corner of every street in baseball, and not that Graveman isn't good. I'm not trying to disparage him, but it's not like we will look at, why didn't Seattle make the playoffs in 2025? If they only had Kendall Graveman, still at the end of the bullpen, man. I actually think what they did, it just looks bad because of where they stand in the playoff chase, but I can understand why they did it. And I know they look bad because of the way they handled the Kelnick situation before the season and all that. Ironically enough, Kelnick's been up twice and he hasn't hit anything. I mean, he's been an absolute flop so far. Doesn't mean he can't be a great player in time, but it's just interesting when teams are in no man's land and it's not clear what they want to do. And you have a team like the Yankees, right? I mean, I don't know. Their playoff odds are still going to be under 50%. I mean, the last I checked, they were like 15 or 20%. They've gone up certainly when they get Rizzo. They've gone up certainly when they get Andrew Heaney, when they get Joey Gallo. You would think is a perfect fit for that park, but I still think they're under, in my mind, under 50% to make the playoffs.
Their pitching's still rough. To me, I thought they needed to address that a little more, and they just really didn't. Sure, we'll talk about Heaney in a bit, but I don't think that was the answer for what was available on the market. I thought they could have went and done more. And you talked about the Mariners. We'll talk about them too. I was rough on it at first, but seeing it all settle, I think they're actually much better off, as you mentioned. So that's one of those as well. Last thing on the Dodgers, just for any listeners, Gavin Lux is pretty much done for the year. So you can just kind of get rid of him and in fantasy concerns. If you didn't already, it should finish it for you. They picked up Danny Duffy, probably just a bullpen arm or a long reliever. Not a ton of fantasy value there. Let's go to Kris Bryant on the Giants. You mentioned you like the move. I love the move, obviously, as a Giants fan. I think there's even a long-term future with him there because they're getting so much money off the books. If they want to make it work, he's a guy that can make it work there. Mm-hmm. And he likes California. He's a California kid and everything. That works out really well. But for the rest of this season, he should slot in at third base, but he could play the outfield. Like you mentioned, he can play first base for all we care. He can play all over the place. He's going to be fine. Do you have any thoughts on how that might impact other potential players that people have been streaming or using on the Giants?
I mean, I would say that maybe Wilmer Flores would be the odd guy out, but there's been so many injuries there that, and if they don't, as you talked about Belt, we can't really count on him. They're hoping he comes back, but maybe that won't be something that has any legs to it. The funny thing is this team is hitting so many home runs, and now they have Bryant, who's legitimately a thumper. But I don't look at anybody on this team and think, oh yeah, there's a home run hitter. I think, okay, yeah, I should hit 20. And, Posey's had a great comeback season. He's been a little bit dinged up of late, but there's another guy I wish I had gumption on, because I know people who were in on Posey, and I was like, well, he might hit 270 or 280 and hit 5 home runs. I don't see how that's going to help me even at a weak catcher position. It turns out he's been one of the right answers at catcher. I'm curious to see if the Giants make the playoffs, which I think they will, if they win the division, if they make a deep run, I've always felt, I grew up in New England, so let's just not count Fenway Park. I think the park in San Francisco, whatever they're calling it this week, is the best park in baseball. It's an unbelievable atmosphere. Yeah, it's kind of chilly. You make sure, I'm always hot. And even I bought a sweatshirt, bought a hoodie, bought a Tim Lincecum $55 hoodie the first time I went, because it was freezing. But it's a beautiful park. It's a great atmosphere, even when the team is just ordinary. But now that they're actually in the middle of it, and in the middle of it with the Dodgers, of course, where they have this great rivalry, one of the best rivalries in sports and in baseball, they have that. Obviously, Bryant, being a Boris client, you figure he's going to test the waters. It's not like, I wouldn't expect like there's going to be like some extension done before the season. But when you get him in your locker room, when you get him in your city, when you get him in your organization, you give him a chance to fall in love with it and to think, he'll live somewhere temporarily, and maybe he'll think, yeah, I can imagine, settling down roots here. This is a great place to live, a great place to play. The park has started to play more fairly in the last couple of seasons. So I'm really curious to see if they can win. Again, I do think Bryant's going to go on the market, but the Giants are getting their chance to subtly kind of sweet talk Bryant and say, hey, it's a pretty cool atmosphere here. You can be a part of this for the next 4, 5, 6 years. And I think it'd be cool if he settled down there. And also, don't overlook just the malaise in Chicago. And, they won the championship there. And obviously it ended famously with Bryant, fielding the grounder. He had a big smile on his face. He threw the ball over to Rizzo, who's out of town now too. But that team wasn't going anywhere. And I think every baseball player, I don't care who you are. You want to win. You want to be in a competitive situation. You get a boost from that. I would say the bottom line is this. Free agency is a crapshoot. I remember how long Bryce Harper was on the market before he finally signed Machado. That offseason where it felt like it went on forever. I'm not saying, if you had to say to me, is Kris Bryant going to sign with the Giants? Yes or no? I'd have to lean no. But if you ask me what team is he going to sign with, I'd have to say the Giants are the favorites, only because he's on the Giants right now. Yeah. And I think it's a really good time. They have smart ownership. They have a smart GM. And I think there's a renaissance of baseball going on in San Francisco right now. And I could see Kris Bryant saying, yeah, I'm a West Coast guy. I want to be a part of this.
Yeah, I'm 100% with you, because that atmosphere, like, I'm biased, so people don't like to take my opinion a lot, but I love the ballpark. I was just happy. Even I came home early from work yesterday. I turned the game on. Giants Dodgers on a Thursday afternoon was packed, and the place was rocking, and it's not even August yet. Like, it's just, you mentioned the fans there, the atmosphere. It's a different kind of animal compared to some other cities out there. So I think he's going to embrace it. They go get him a place in the marina, like most of the players live. He's going to love that area. Like, it's just it sets up as a fun place. We'll see. I got down the road here. But I'm looking forward to him joining that team.
I can't say enough too. Anybody listening who hasn't been to that park, it's going to be near the top of your target list. And also, it doesn't hurt that a lot of lazy after. I'm an East Coast. Although I live in the Midwest, I'm on East Coast time. A lot of times when 11 o'clock rolls around and I have nothing to do, I just put the Giants game on because their announcers are so good.
They're the best.
And I thought Vince Scully was in a class of his own. Obviously, he's been retired for a few years. And now I toggle back and forth between the Mets announcers and the Giants announcers and it's nice that they play on different coasts. So I can, a lot of times I watch and I could care less about the Mets, really. I love Jacob deGrom. They have some players who I like, but I'm not in any way emotionally invested with the Mets. But Cohen and Darling and Hernandez just have tremendous chemistry. And obviously, as a Giants fan, Kuiper and Krukow are terrific, and the backdrop, the park. They're not every park gives me tingles, but that park, I wish they wouldn't have to change the name every year or two. But it's a tremendous place to take in baseball, whether you're watching on TV or please get to that park. It's well worth. You're going to need a jacket, you're going to need a sweatshirt, but great park to eat, great park to watch the game, and I don't care if I think of my friend Chris Morgan who lives in the area. He'll sit in the upper deck and take these unbelievable shots of the bay and everything. You get to see everything.
Yeah.
So there's not a bad seat in the park. You don't have to necessarily, I've sat in good seats there. I've sat in lesser seats there. And they're really literally, as the cliche goes, there's not a bad place to sit in that ballpark.
100% agree. I've sat pretty much everywhere, and no, I did not pay Scott to say all those nice things either. Everybody, that was straight from him. So it's a great place. Go check that out. Another member of the Cubs takes off. He goes to the New York Mets, and this kind of goes to the question of DeGrom being healthy. Also goes to Lindor. When's he coming back? So they go and grab Javy Baez, who can slot in at shortstop for now, move over to second base probably when Lindor comes back. We know Baez strikes out a ton, but he also hits with a lot of power. So it's an upgrade for the Mets. But are you liking this fit in New York? Or are you thinking, I don't know, is it really really a great move?
I thought the price was reasonable. He's actually really good friends with Lindor. I think they might be best friends. It never hurts to, do the NBA move, get your super friends together. I thought this offense was kind of a sleeping giant into the second half because Michael Conforto had about the worst half he could had. He was hurt. He was unlucky in some of his batted ball metrics. He just started to hit a little bit better before the All-Star break. Nimmo had been hurt for a while. Had been a lost first half for Dominic Smith. Had been a little bit of a disappointing first out. Maybe Pete Alonso is the opposite. We always think, oh no, he's in the home run derby and he's going to be terrible afterwards. Maybe the home run derby got Pete Alonso going because he's been whacking the ball all over the place since the All-Star break and since winning the home run derby. I think this should be a good offense on paper, not maybe what top 3 offense, but it should be at least like a top 7, top 8 offense. But it comes down ultimately to DeGrom. If there's no Jacob DeGrom, I don't think the Mets have any upside. I also thought it was incumbent for them to improve the pitching. Diaz has been kind of shaky for I don't know. It seems like a month now, where every time the Mets have a late game, maybe the bullpen thinks that DeGrom just pitched because remember all the trouble he would have where he pitched this unbelievable game and the Mets would find some cosmically crazy way to lose it.
That's Giolito this year.
Sure. I feel a little bit cheated as a baseball fan because I thought DeGrom had a chance to do like Bob Gibson. Before my time, before your time, 1968 belonged to him. And I thought we had a chance of 2021 might belong to Jacob DeGrom, and maybe it still will, where he could just have an ERA that's so silly low that everybody can recite it by heart. And he's going to have that ERA, but it's not going to mean that much if he misses half the season. So as a baseball fan, I just want to see him come back. And he's even hitting the ball pretty well, as part of the story too. Was the the runaway favorite to be MVP, especially after Acuna got hurt. So I think the Baez move was nice. Yeah, he strikes out a ton, and he'll strike out in some crazy pitches, right? I mean, he'll strike out on pitches that land before the plate. He'll strike out on wild pitches. He'll where he gets to go to run to first base. I mean, they have not invented the pitch that Javy Baez isn't tempted to swing at, but I thought he was a good move for a team that needed a jolt of adrenaline, maybe just a little bit of joie de vivre that he injects into this team. And the Cubs, once you're going to start selling, man, go all in. And they did. They sold everything. They sold their 2 slugging corners. They sold their slugging shortstop. They sold their closer, a crosstown trade, no less, which is always fun when teams do that. So, once you'll commit, you got to commit. You could go all in once you've actually chosen a path, and they did that. Baez isn't my favorite player because, again, I'd like to have a little bit of discipline at the plate, but I think a Mets team that needs a jolt of adrenaline on offense, I can see why they did it. I think it made sense.
Yeah, I'm with you. That's kind of what I explained to some Mets fans that were kind of like bummed out. They give up their 2020 first-round draft pick for him, so it was a decent return. But I said, if anything, you get a guy that could run into probably another 10-plus home runs the rest of the way, and maybe more. But at worst, what he brings to that locker room, he's been there before. So they've been to the postseason. He brings that attitude. And like you mentioned, the relationship with Lindor, those little things you can't really just put on paper. So that's like a big move if the Mets continue to try to make this playoff push that they're a part of. So I think that's a very, very intriguing part of that deal as well.
And what's really fun, and I don't know what order you want to go in, but the other quasi contenders in that division went after it too. I mean, the Braves made a ton I don't even know who's on the Braves anymore because they made like 17 trades.
They have 8 outfielders now.
Philadelphia tried to improve their team too. And God love the Braves. It would have been very easy when Acuna got hurt to say, okay, that's it. It's not our season. Let's just, get ready for next year. But they said, no, we think the Mets are vulnerable. The Phillies still think they're in it. So, especially Atlanta, they were as aggressive as any team that wasn't clearly in the playoff hunt. So, that's all you can ask for from a baseball fan standpoint, right? Is you want your team to care. You want your team to feel the way you do. And, I tip my cap to the Braves for that. I mean, they went after it aggressively.
And you got to appreciate it because, like you said, they could have just folded up the tent and left when Acuna went down, and they went and traded for Jock Peterson, which, that's suspect, but we know what Jock can do if he gets hot. Like it could be fun. And then he disappears. But then today on Friday, they go and trade for Eddie Rosario, who's banged up, but when healthy, is a nice left-handed bat in that ballpark. They go bring Adam Duvall back. We've seen what he can do. They go get Jorge Soler, who was just swinging. He's been swinging it really well since the break. And then they go and trade for Richie Rodriguez to go in the bullpen to maybe give a nice right-handed compliment to Will Smith there. So it kind of mentions everything you're saying. That's really strong. I'm not going to make you decide, do you want Richard Rodriguez or Will Smith the rest of the way? Because that's, again, going to be quite the committee. But that outfield situation, like, how do you foresee that maybe from a fantasy impact with all these moving parts now?
Well, they could sit Peterson if they want against lefties, assuming they have some kind of reasonable answer in center field. Also, remember, they got Stephen Vogt, too. I forget exactly when they got Vogt, but some point earlier this month, I believe it was.
Yeah, it was right after Peterson, I think.
Right. So it's been a and that's another thing that made this deadline really fun, is it wasn't just everything happened today. I mean, there's been a gradual ramping up of teams making trades, and it's been fun. I mean, yesterday would have stood for a lot of years as a really good final day deadline. And then just today just was crazy. Although the Dodgers trade, I think, still was the craziest thing that happened. But Soler's a sore spot for me because I had some shares of Soler, and in one shallower league, I actually cut him at some point, maybe a month ago. And in mixed labor, which is 15 teams, he was still as lousy as he had been. He was still too good to cut. And I saw the reasons why he should have been a little bit better than he was playing, but it was just hard for me to continue to own Soler at, hitting 173 with no power. So I eventually traded him for, I forget what pitcher I got, but it was somebody who was like a 4.5 ERA. I mean, I basically made a trade that looks terrible on paper right now, but it sure seems like he's figured it out. And the hot hand is real. It's hard to define what it is and when it starts and when it's going to end. And obviously he's not going to be hot for 3 months or something like that. But I'd be thrilled to be rolling out Jorge Soler. If I'm drafting a team from scratch right now, I would have no problem drafting him as like my number 3, number 4 outfielder. That's how. This is a guy who's hit 48, 50 home runs, something like that before. I mean, he was one of the going back to the Cubs, where it felt like the Cubs had too many prospects, had too many power hitters. All these guys came up at the same time, and Soler was considered one of the jewels of that group. So it's just fun to see him playing well again. And although it's interesting that him and Duvall, they kind of check the same box, right? Yeah, and you see, this is a team that's going to swing and miss an awful lot. Mm-hmm. Austin Riley has swing and miss in his game too. I'm a little bit disappointed that I thought Dansby Swanson was ready to take a step up and maybe become a star. And he's actually taken a step backwards, and he's just kind of an average major leaguer right now. And, for somebody who at one point was, a top 5 prospect, maybe even the number 1 prospect in baseball, just a little bit disappointed by that. But, I'm not sure the contract status of all these guys. Obviously next year, Acuna comes back. Yeah. So they're going to have to figure it out. Eddie Rosario, another left-handed bat. I don't know if the Braves can petition to use a DH because they have more hitters than they can use.
Maybe they're planning ahead for the next agreement to have a DH. Maybe that's part of their deal. They're like, you know what? We're going to platoon Rosario, Peterson, and one guy, and then use Duvall and Soler and one guy, and then go from there.
I mean, that's certainly possible that we'll have one in the National League next year. I think a lot of people think that. But sometimes you think about the idea that you can never have enough pitching, and the idea is that, well, look, just have 7, 8 good starters, and it will take care of itself. Somebody will pitch poorly, somebody will get hurt, somebody else will get hurt, and then just let that take care of itself. I guess the Braves have taken that approach to the outfield. It's like, okay, let's just have too many good players, and then we'll work on matchups. We'll work on who's hot. We'll work on who's dinged up, who needs time off, and also, something that you almost never see teams have anymore. They'll have an advantage when they have to pinch hit. In the National League, where they're not being a DH yet. How frustrating is it when a team has to pinch hit in a big situation and the backup catcher comes up or some guy who's hitting 198 and like, oh, okay, well, he's the best pinch hitter they have. At least they'll have a legitimate guy they can throw up there in some of these situations. And who knows, maybe that could swing a game in September.
That's a great point because it was I think in the doubleheader between the Phillies and the Nationals, Vince Velasquez pinch hit.
Right. So you see that a lot. It's not uncommon. It's not uncommon to see the pitchers pinch hit. Right.
Yeah. And that's just that to me as a fan, that'd be like unacceptable. We can't do that, guys. Like that just can't happen. So, I'm with you there. It's very interesting to see how that plays out. Those guys are all fantasy interesting, but I want to see how it plays out because if it's a platoon, that's very, very troublesome. Of course.
We know, right? I mean, playing time is so gigantically important in fantasy. And if you're in a mixed league, you need your guy playing 6 out of 7 days, if not 7 out of 7. It's just platoons. Obviously, if you're on the short side of the platoon, it really hurts you. But even a left-handed batter, If he's being platooned against lefties, there's just going to be some weeks where they face the 3 lefties. That's why I've become such a big proponent of the NFFC format with that Friday.
It's so
at some
nice.
point I'm going to have to jump in there and make sure I don't have any lineup changes to make. But so you can play with the rosters and play with the lineup schedules. You still have to deal with rain. You still have to deal with, unfortunately, every once in a while there's a COVID cancellation or something like that. But it seems like to me, because I know not everybody, I play in some leagues that have daily transactions, and I realize that's too intense for some people. But what's more frustrating than if I'm in my hometown keeper league, we have weekly transactions and we have no DL, which I'm not a big DL guy. I actually like the NFFC, just to look, here's your bench and you deal with it. But in my hometown league, if your guy gets hurt on Monday, you're stuck.
You're screwed.
You're just, okay, see you next week. Enjoy the zeros for the rest of the week.
Yeah.
So I think having that Friday trade, and also what I like about the NFFC is it's relative to when your player's first game is. So if you don't know what you're going to do with somebody on Monday, but his first game comes on Tuesday and you have another swap option, you get to use the benefit of the entire time to acquire information and to figure out what you want to do. So I think that's a really good way of running it. And I hope more leagues accept something like that or use a similar format in the future, because I think it just adds more playability and skill to the game.
Agreed. Yeah, I'm becoming a bigger and bigger fan of them in recent years, playing other formats as well. It's a great platform, and just like the system works great. Also, it's easy to draft off of and everything else. You mentioned the Phillies just a bit ago. They have made a couple moves, as you mentioned. They went and acquired Kyle Gibson as a starter because they need obviously more starting depth, which we just talked about Vinny Velasquez, so they can use that. They went and grabbed Ian Kennedy, which we'll see what that means for Ranger Suarez, who looked like he was taking over there. They would got Freddie Galvis as another platoon infielder, which could be big because they've been rolling on Ronald Torres a lot and everything. Do you think there's any fantasy impact from those 3 guys coming over to Philadelphia?
Yeah, I mean, Kyle Gibson, all-star, right? And then, of course, his correction hit him hard. He had his lunch handed to him in a recent start. I'm curious to see if Kennedy, Ian Kennedy was the classic, he's a closer on a bad team, but you better hope he's not traded because he'll be traded to a team that won't close with him. Well, maybe he actually will be a closer in Philadelphia. And it's funny because I'm just looking at their depth chart, and at different points I've believed in Neris. At different points I believed in Alvarado. At different points I believed in Connor Brogdon for a second. Brandon Kinsler was a closer in Miami, I think, last year. Archie Bradley at one point was a reliever that we all thought was pretty good. I feel like all of these guys have hurt me or just at some point I've mistimed the market on all of them. So a little bit of a sore spot for me, but I'm thinking the Kennedy should close here, although you don't know. I mean, maybe there's no pressure closing on a Texas team. You're going nowhere, and maybe we'll see. I remember when the Tigers traded, I forget who their closer was. They traded him to the Braves a year or 2 ago, and then all of a sudden he was back in a pennant race and he couldn't get anybody out. I know not everybody believes in that type of thing as being a real factor, but if I were the Phillies, I would say, hey, Kennedy, you've been a good closer for the Rangers. Let's give you a shot. And a lot of times with these unsettled bullpens, and as people are trying to figure out Fab and Sunday comes around and everything, don't overlook just having the baton in your hand and having the guy who recorded the last save so often means so much. I'm sure with a lot of these teams, we're going to say, we have a lot of options. We're going to mix and match. It might be a committee. We don't have a set closer. A lot of times that's just shorthand for it. The first guy to shut the door in the 9th inning is our closer until he proves that he's not. And I could see this being a situation where if maybe Kennedy gets a chance to close the next couple of days and does it, then they just shrug and say, okay, maybe Ian Kennedy's our guy. Maybe the first person to actually take a positive step forward in this bullpen, maybe somebody who gets a little bit of leash. And in the case of Kennedy, there's no scar tissue here. He's had a great season. The only thing that's really gone wrong is he was on the IL briefly, but I don't see any reason why he couldn't be there. I would have to bet on Kennedy the rest of the way.
I'm with you because that's how Girardi works. Like we've seen him, like he's used a lot of guys, but it's his guy until they prove him wrong. Basically, like he's gone to these guys and they have to prove him wrong a few times. So I could see them, and he likes his veterans, usually not as well. So I could see Ian Kennedy getting his shot and going from there and see where that goes. Ranger Suarez might end the season there. We'll see. I wouldn't be surprised if Hector Neris gets another shot at it just because that's the way the Philadelphia situation's gone. Let's go to Toronto. They made some moves. They made some serious moves. They went and got Jose Berrios for a couple of big-time prospects. That's a nice move for Toronto, who needs some starting pitching help. They went and got Brad Hand, maybe play like a 1A to 1B to Jordan Romano, so they can go situations because that's kind of what they've wanted to do the whole time. Then they also go and get Joakim Soria, which gives them even more depth because they've noticed, well, A, they need it playing on the AL East. Starting pitchers don't go very deep. And B, it can't hurt to have another option back there. So what's your thoughts on Berrios, Hand, and Soria going to Toronto?
Love what they did. we all know the problem here is not the offense, right? I mean,
Yep.
they have plenty of guys who can hit, plenty of guys who can get on base. Wonderful breakout season from Guerrero. Bo Bichette looks like a player who could be an MVP someday. I mean, Guerrero might be the MVP this year. And they have so many good hitters that a lot of times they have a good hitter on the bench, because once everybody's healthy, once they got everybody back, so that they knew that their problem was, could we find an impact starter, of which there weren't that many out there. And they have, what I love about Berrios, and I'll admit, I've been guilty of waiting for Berrios to take the step up to maybe being like a fringy Cy Young contender. And he's still more of a 2, more of a 3. Well, on this team, he can be that. He can be somebody who would legitimately be in a playoff rotation, but wouldn't start the first game. And I think that's really who he is right now. And they got multiple pieces, as you said, for the bullpen. They got a lefty, they got a righty. They have now 3 different guys who have closing experience, if you give the benefit of the doubt to Romano too. And so they can do a lot of creative things. This is a really fun team. I would love to see Toronto in the playoffs, because it'd just be a breath of fresh air to see, Bo Bichette and Vladimir Guerrero and Teoscar Hernandez in the playoffs, stuff like that. Obviously, we've seen George Springer in the World Series before, but this is such a young team, and it's got all those legacy players, all those players where including Biggio, where their fathers were all players in the major leagues. I think the question is, was Toronto a year ahead of schedule when they contended this year? Or was this team as maybe was a 2022 team, a 2023 team? I love the fact that they're going for it right now. And I think now that Robbie Ray has reinvented himself, we always knew he could strike out people, but I mean, his improvement with his control has been unbelievable. I wouldn't want to face these guys in a coin flip game, whether it be Ryu or Ray, or I guess even Berrios. I mean, any of those guys could throw 7 bagels at you. Mm-hmm. This is a fun team. This is a dangerous team. This is a team that's going to be set up to be competitive and win for a really long time, but maybe they're just a year ahead of schedule. And I love that they, rather than sit back and say, oh, we're really thinking about 22, they said, no, let's do it right now. And they got pieces. I thought the prices they paid for everybody was reasonable. Also, and a guy like Soria is a great guy to get. Arizona's going nowhere. They get the worst team in baseball. You don't have to give up a lot to get a player like that. He's still got some life in his 36 or 37-year-old arm. I love what Toronto did. They addressed exactly what they needed. And even though they may not play a baseball game in Toronto this year, but they've been the nomads of Major League Baseball, but they're one of my favorite teams. They're a really fun team, and I would love to see them in the playoffs. And I think they got the type of stuff that could get them into the playoffs.
Well, they start Toronto tonight, so that's happening.
Okay, they finally moved it. I knew that was down the road. Okay.
Yeah, no, unless something crazy happens, they at least gonna get 3 games there before that all comes to an end. But that'll be fun.
Isn't it just crazy that there are 3 home cities? And yeah. I mean, in a season, it's just so crazy, man.
Like it can't, and they're still winning games. You wouldn't be surprised if so much youth there, they just get distracted so easy. They're not getting settled down. They're not getting like a home base. It makes it tough. It makes it really tough. So it's impressive what they're doing. And I'm glad they went for it because, like you said, where they're in the standings, they could have kind of wiggle roomed it. But you look around the East, like the Red Sox are up top, but you have the Yankees and you have the Rays and company, but it's still wide open. Like it's not like anyone's really pulled away yet. So you get those couple extra bullpen arms, you get that other stars. You have 3 strong starters to go with. It can shorten the game with the bullpen. Like it's a very, very intriguing move, and you can play more situational matchups with some of these powerful offenses. So I like what Toronto did.
I also think that when you look at the division, there's nothing about the totality of the Tampa Bay and Boston rosters that makes it think like, oh, they're a runaway juggernaut. No. I don't think anybody would be surprised if out of nowhere the Red Sox had like a 2-11 stretch or something like that. I mean, their pitching staff is very ordinary, and Tampa Bay is always one of those teams that they have talent and you respect it, but you look at it and they always feel to me like an 88 to 90 win team. They never feel like a 97, 98 win team to me. Obviously, the loss of Glass now was gigantic. We'll see if they can get their bullpen the way they want it. And it sounds like Nick Anderson might be somebody that they're counting on for the last couple of months. So I'm trying to hold on to him where I can. But I always feel like Tampa Bay will find a way to win 5 more games than they should because they're good at really subtle things. And the Red Sox, I mean, all they did, as far as I know, is get Schwarber. They made a very minor deal with the Pirates that probably won't impact them. There is a team that really could have used a Berrios, that could have used even some of this bullpen help, I thought. And I don't blame Toronto. I don't blame the Yankees. I mean, the Yankees, just who they are, their birthright. Unless they're buried under 20 feet of snow, they're going to try to make their team better because they feel like they should be in the playoffs every year. But I'm looking at the teams at the top of this division, and I'm thinking, why couldn't we catch them? They don't look unbeatable to me. And I think the teams that went after it, 4 teams are going after it in this division, and I think they're all merited. I think Toronto and New York doing it made a heck of a lot of sense.
Yeah, I'm with you there. You mentioned the Red Sox. They went and got Kyle Schwarber, as we talked about. They made a little deal with the Pirates, but they also went last minute, like a little after the bell. They went and got Hansel Robles from Minnesota, who's been very shaky this year, but does give them some experience in the bullpen. On the Kyle Schwarber front, Scott, there's been discussions, he can play the outfield. Maybe he's the first base answer they've been looking for. He's obviously out for a little bit longer, but he's taking batting practice now, which is a good sign for his hip injury. When he returns to the Red Sox, where do you foresee him fitting in?
I like it. Fenway is actually quietly a really good place for a left-handed hitter if you'll use the whole park. I don't know off the top of my head the pull metrics for Schwarber. When I think in my mind's eye of him hitting a home run, I always think of him pulling one and crushing one into the upper deck or something like that. But the thing about Fenway too is there are places you could hide him. You could, if you needed to, you could hide him in left field where he's not as bad as he used to be in the field. He's actually become somebody who, there was one point 2 or 3 years ago where it's like, okay, this guy can't become a DH soon enough. And who knows, maybe he will settle in as a DH, but you could hide him at first. You could hide him in left field, National League Series, in a playoff series, in a World Series, something like that. Obviously he was white hot about 2 or 3 weeks ago where it felt like he was hitting a home run every other at bat. And since he's passed that torch to Jorge Soler and Joey Votto, what a story with Votto, man. I didn't see that coming at all. And credit to him for retooling his swing. But I'm just disappointed the Red Sox didn't make a major. Maybe Robles will find his way and help the bullpen, but I thought they needed to add a starter. And I know there weren't a ton of guys going in the market, but I thought Berrios would have been a great get for them. I thought even Andrew Heaney would have been a good get for them. I think they need another starter. I don't trust it. I think everybody in the rotation is pitching one slot, if not 2 slots above where they naturally fit. And it's just hard for me to think that this Red Sox team isn't going to be exposed at some point.
Yeah, I'm just I thought the pitching was suspect going into the season, so we'll see where this one plays out. But I am curious to see how Schwarber fits in there. Look, he's about a 42 to 45% pull guy, and most of it goes to center field, to right field. Center field's a problem in Fenway, obviously, but if he pulls it, he'll be okay, as you mentioned. The Yankees, we know the Yankees did damage. They went and got Joey Gallo, who's batting second or third on Friday night. They went and got Joely Rodriguez for the bullpen, who was a potential closer when Ian Kennedy got traded. That's not happening anymore. You got Anthony Rizzo. You got Andrew Heaney. Where do you think the dust settles with the Yankees now?
I still don't think they're going to make the playoffs, but at least they can tell themselves a story where, this could, their outfield, what they really, again, going back to Joe Sheehan, he was talking about what they really need is a player like Brett Butler, and he's been retired for like 25 to 30 years.
That's such a great name.
Brett Gardner was their center fielder. It just didn't make any sense. Can they keep all the injuries that they've had? That Luke Voigt's been kind of a washout year, and now if everybody's healthy, Voigt may not play, or Urshela's been hurt. LeMahieu's had a really disappointing season. We know Giancarlo Stanton in full seasons never mix. Up and down year for Gary Sanchez. It's taken a while for me to, like, when I set lineups and do DFS and everything, and I'm just naturally thinking, okay, I don't want to mess with Yankee Stadium. I don't want to mess with the Yankee lineup. And it took a while for me to look and say, wait a minute, this is a very average offense. This is nothing to be afraid of. This is the team that said we need Rougned Odor. We need Brett Gardner in the lineup. We need.
They've been playing Greg Allen.
Greg Allen who I picked up in a league or two, a couple of deep leagues. And he had maybe a moment where he was productive, but I don't think their offense is good enough. And I think for this team to have upside, they needed Garrett Cole to be like a Cy Young slam dunk or slot, second or third in the Cy Young voting, Garrett Cole. And I realize he's kind of had an up and down season. Even the other day when he had a bunch of runs on his tab, he still did strike out 10 guys. He's one of the poster children for when we talk about the sticky stuff, how much of it is it hurting him to not be able to do the stuff that he was doing to the baseball and everything. But you look at the rest of the rotation, I just see a bunch of guys who are nice 3, 4, 5 starters. Where's the second starter here? I always imagine the Yankees being able to throw a rotation similar to what the Dodgers have right now, where it's like 3 guys you're afraid of. I don't think they have that. And the bullpen is all of a sudden pretty suspect if they can't count on Aroldis Chapman. And there's been some other guys who have broken down a little bit. Loisago goes on the IL for a while. Chad Green's nice, but I still feel when Chad Green comes in a game that he's gettable. He's not somebody who's untouchable. Add it all up, hash it all out. I think the Yankees will be in the playoff race most of the season, and they'll probably be eliminated with like 2 or 3 days to go. This looks like an 87 win team to me.
Yeah, not addressing their bullpen situation was the biggest surprise to me. That was a massive surprise. A better starting pitcher would have been good too, because I'm just not a real Heaney guy, but the bullpen was a big one. Let's go to the Milwaukee Brewers. Then you mentioned trades have already been happening. They got Adames like a month or so ago. They've gotten Rowdy Tellez, which has actually been a great addition this past week because he's getting to play versus right-handed pitching. And they go and add Eduardo Escobar, which gives them a nice right-handed. He's a switch hitter, but they need a right-handed power bat versus lefties, which he helps with there to go at first base potentially with Tellez or throughout the lineup there. How do you see all this playing out for Milwaukee?
And the underrated one, maybe the most underrated move, because it happened such a long time ago, is they got Willy Adames, who's been excellent for them. The thing that I just don't know what to do with this outfield, where Lorenzo Cain's coming back. Who knows what that will turn out to be? Jackie Bradley, who every year or so, I have a moment where I believe in Jackie Bradley. I haven't had it yet this year, and maybe I'm just not going to have it. I just accepted that the guy can't hit. He's a wonderful defensive player. I've given up having any good theory on Christian Yelich, and right now he's got COVID, so he's not playing. I mean, they're in a situation where Omar Narvaez has become their third or fourth place hitter. He's become really important in this offense, and I just think they're going to need to hit more. It's a shame because you look at the staff. Burns has had a breakout season. Woodruff is a legitimate ace, and Freddie Peralta, if he can hold up, I know he's getting to a point uncharted territory with the workload he's had, but you would think he's a dominant number 3 guy. And Hader's still a really good cleaser. Devin Williams has kind of found his way. They have a lot of interesting arms. I like the way this team is run. I like their GM. I think they clearly are the class of that division, but I don't think they're going to score enough runs. They don't have their lineup. You get to the bottom of the weak belly of their lineup. I mean, Escobar's going to help. He was a nice get for them, and it's kind of the type of move that Milwaukee makes, right? They make trades for guys like Escobar. They make trades for guys like Willy Adames. They make under the fold trades. They make, if you were looking in a sports section, they make page 3, page 4 trades. They don't make the front page trade, but although they did in the offseason, the year that they got Yelich, of course. But they do a lot of really smart shopping to get guys who fit what they're trying to do. But I just don't like the second half of their lineup. I think their lineup gets thin way too quickly. And there's going to be teams in the playoffs that have deep lineups. The Padres have a deep lineup. The Giants have a deep lineup. And the Dodgers, man, do they have a deep lineup. And I think that's going to be exposed unless you just ask the front half of their pitching just to pitch out of their minds. That's still, you're always going to have a puncher's chance when you have legitimate aces in your rotation. But I don't think this team's going to score enough runs to have any kind of playoff upside.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how it plays out. I think they finally have, like last year or in recent years, it's been they have all the offense in the world. Where's the pitching? Now they have the pitching. Where's the offense? It's kind of a weird dynamic in Milwaukee, but I like what they're doing. Let's just see if Yelich could somehow wake up. That'd be great. But I'm with you. It's kind of.
Do you have a theory? Do you have a theory on Christian Yelich? Because I don't have a good answer on him.
Well, going into the season, he was blaming the lack of video, like JDM and those guys were, but they're hitting and Yelich isn't. So you're kind of like, okay, well, that's not obviously it. So what is it now? And then, he thought maybe he's getting comfortable because he had like a 2-week run where he looked really good again. You're thinking, okay, he's coming back, and that's gone again. I think maybe the back's hurting more than he gives off. Like back injuries, or if you've had back injuries, they linger, they show up out of nowhere. Like they're just a pain, period. And I could see that having something to do with it. Or he's pressing. I don't know, but yeah, it's weird.
It's just so crazy that it wasn't that long ago that you couldn't get the guy out. He was an MVP, and just like Bellinger, he went from National League MVP.
Well, Bellinger goes and changes his swing after one of that. Just made no sense at all. Like, what are you doing, man? Don't reinvent the wheel right now.
Right, it ain't broke. Why are you trying to fix it? Exactly.
Yeah, that one was strange. But let's go to Oakland, who was actually aggressive. They went and got Starling Marte. That's a great move. You can't really say. And it was a good move for Miami getting Luzardo. I think that's a great risk for a team like Miami to go try to, fix him and see how he is.
That was a fun trade. That was a really fun trade.
That was one of those. I love those. That's kind of why I like that Minnesota one for Berrios is the team that's rebuilding gets these prospects. Perfect. Like, let's do this. And then the contender gets actually a piece that's going to help them right now. So, it made total sense on both sides of the spectrum. So the Marte Luzardo trade was awesome. But then there's kind of an under-the-radar one that took place on Friday with the Nats and the A's. Josh Harrison and Yan Gomes come to Oakland. And I tweeted out them all. This is the perfect, Oakland A's player if you look it up in the dictionary. Yep. Josh Harrison, Yan, these are the perfect A's right here. How do you think they fit in? Because Sean Murphy's been kind of mediocre, even though we know the talent's there. Does Gomes eat into that quite a bit? And then Josh Harrison, he can play everywhere. Does he kind of take Tony Kemp's spot potentially? How do you think that goes?
Yeah, you can definitely see Brad Pitt and Jonah Hill pulling off these trades.
Yes.
Classic. let's shop in the secondary or tertiary markets,
Yep.
and let's find a team. They found a team in Washington that was tearing it all down. And while other people were getting the superstars, and look, don't begrudge the Dodgers for what they did, but Oakland was smart enough to see some of the lesser appreciated values. I mean, Josh Harrison feels like somebody who should have been on the A's already in his career.
Yeah, he fits that mold. He's gonna put that uniform on, and you're just gonna be like,
"Yep, he's an A." He plays all over the place. He does little things well, and I don't think they want to run Jed Lowry into the ground. So you can, and he's at an age where you have to be nervous about what his staying power is. So you can play a little bit for Lowry. It will probably marginalize Kemp to some degree, and he can go back to being what he probably should be, somebody who plays once or twice a week and is a really good bench player and can fill in anywhere. So you get that. I think the catching will probably be 50-50, which is no big deal. Most teams now, it's the idea of one guy catching the majority of the games is out the window with most teams. Most teams would like to have a 60-40 or a 65-35 catching split, and a lot of teams are just 50-50 with it. And Gomes has always been one of my favorite players. I remember him being a down ballot MVP guy with Cleveland a few years ago. I guess that was kind of when he was a different player. He's not the same guy anymore. But I thought he was at a time where there isn't that much catching. It feels like whenever you throw your catcher out there, you're really giving up something. Most teams, it's like, well, we'll just accept that the catcher can't hit. But with some other teams, it's like, okay, the guy can hit, but maybe he's a really weak defensive presence. I guess that's what the Gary Sanchez catching experience is like. Gomes is a capable hitter in the context of what hitters are like for catchers in 2021, and still I think a plus defender. I would think that's a pretty close to 50-50 at catcher, and I totally agree with you. These are on-brand moves for the A's, and they're they traded Luzardo, and again, an interesting get for the Marlins. It's fun to see Kim Ng running the team.
He's doing great stuff there
and doing some really interesting stuff. They could be a fun team. I thought, what they still have, I think, a plus run differential. I have an over-under ticket on the Marlins that's going to lose, and I feel like I was on the right side of it all year. It's just they've been unlucky with the wins and losses. But even with Luzardo being traded, it's interesting. I don't see a number one on the A's staff, but Manaea, Bassett, Montas, Caprillion, Irvin, that's a pretty good rotation. I mean, I feel like they are going to deserve to be in the playoffs. The problem is they're going to get in the playoffs, and they're going to be up against somebody who's much better than whoever their number one starter presumably is. I guess it would be Manaea, although I'm a Chris Bassett fan too. I just wish this team had somebody who could be a front man. I would have loved to have seen Scherzer on this team.
Oh, that would have been
amazing. Look, I'm at the front of this, and now everybody slots where they're supposed to slot.
That'd have been great.
But that said, that's not how Oakland does things. They're a team that does things on a budget. They're a team that does things on the margins, and I think they made their team better, and that's all you can ask. And they made their team better in a subtle way, and I thought it was really fun. And and I didn't even talk at all about Marte, who still profiles as somebody who can bat anywhere from first to fifth in a lineup and can do a lot of different things. A power guy, a speed guy, a decent defender. Somebody who makes a lot of sense for them. So again, Oakland, I think it's going to be what we usually see from Oakland. They'll make the playoffs. They'll be an interesting team. They'll find a way to lose. We'll talk about Billy Beane's crap doesn't work in the playoffs, although nobody's expecting this team to go deep. But it's a fun team. It's a couple of years ago, I thought it was the most fun team in baseball, actually. But it's a fun team, and I love the way, and this can just be a lesson to people who haven't had their trade deadline come in fantasy, that while your opponents are out trying to chase the white whales, sometimes the improvement on the margins can be just as important.
Yeah, I had a fellow Yahoo fantasy person on a few weeks ago, Fred Zinke, and we talked about the art of trades, and we discussed that very point. Like, don't go for the massive splash. Go for the guys that kind of chip away at the stats for you. So
nobody better trading than Fred Zinke, by the way.
Yeah,
so you need trade tips. I encourage you to go to his Twitter account and to bombard him 24 hours a day, because he's as good as it is. One, because I'm just teasing my friend, but he's as good as it comes when it comes to trading and trade advice. He's just so good at that.
He's very, very good at that. Let's talk about the Seattle Mariners. Like, obviously, we could talk Astros, but they got some relievers. That's kind of self-explanatory what took place there. But the Mariners, they go and they get Abraham Toro, which is a sneaky good move because they have eligibility for a few years. And he was only 24, once a big time, or not big time, but a high-end prospect. And so there's something there possibly. And then they go and make the deal for Diego Castillo, which kind of replaces Kendall Graveman. And you get Castillo for a few more years. So it's kind of when the dust settled, Seattle actually improved potentially for the future. So this is a very intriguing move. How do you like Diego Castillo and Abraham Toro for the rest of this season, at least?
Yeah, I mean, they know Seager, I think he's at the end of his deal, right? And they've made it clear that they're probably not going to bring him back. So Toro's a switch hitter. He had kind of an up and down season with Houston. Man, that Houston lineup, I mean, just good at everything. They get on base, they make contact, they hit home runs.
They're scary.
and I know it's easy, to make a Houston joke and everything. If they won a
I'm
championship,
past that. That's in the past now.
Yeah, I'm done with that. They have so many. And you think of Michael Brantley, just the professional hitter. To me, he's like the fulcrum of what makes them. Real is like that as well. But I think Seattle did. I know it doesn't it doesn't sell well with the fan base, which is like, hey, 20 years of this garbage. But they didn't have the horses to be major contenders. And when they got the chance to flip a Kendall Graveman for somebody who could actually be a position player and could be maybe a 3 or 4 win player for them down the road, I think they had to do it. I think it was smart to see that reliever value is fleeting and a position player is so much more valuable. And I'm excited. I would love to see Seattle be a major player in a couple of years. We see Kelnick. I know he hasn't done much in his 2 trials. Cal Raleigh is up now. He's not actually hitting a lot at the catcher position, but there are interesting pieces in this organization. Kikuchi's had a nice step-up year. Logan Gilbert at times has looked like somebody who belongs on a staff and maybe could even be a playoff starter. Probably not a number 1, but somebody who could be maybe a 3 or 4 on a contending team. So we're starting to see. We know, look, they have the winning record, but they have the minus point differential or run differential. They've been really lucky in 1-run games. There's really no rhyme or reason why any team should ever be like that, unless your bullpen was just lights out. And nobody said that about this bullpen. But it's a brighter. The sun is coming out in Seattle. They're looking towards a brighter day, and I think you have to understand that this year that there wasn't a lot of upside, even if they made the playoffs. And they traded a relief pitcher. It's not like they traded like their cleanup hitter or something, or they traded Kelnick or something like that. I mean, they traded the most fungible thing. Again, back to Joe Sheehan, he always says that a closer is an unneeded luxury on a losing team. Now, Seattle's not a losing team, but
that's a good quote, though.
Yeah, it's an unneeded luxury. Of course, they went out and got Castillo, so people might say, well, what's the story with that? But I think Seattle's doing a lot. I know it's been a weird year for them, the way the season started with the front office and how they handled the Kelnick situation, and that really didn't hit a really poor tone. But I think in the long run, they did the right thing. It just looks bad when you've been irrelevant for 20 years.
Yeah, it is tough, but like I said, you get Castillo and Toro now for a few years down the road, which I think goes very well as these young hitters, as they have, keep coming up just for fun, because Toro's going to be a popular name this weekend in Fab. How aggressive would you be on a guy like Toro?
We're thinking 12 team, 15
Let's say 12. Let's say 12 teams. 15, I think he's probably gone.
Yeah,
he's most grabbed and playing for Bregman already. So I'd say 12 teams.
He's certainly not like a slam my fist I have to have. I mean, his OBP is still under 300, but you would think he'd have good roster real estate. I would like to think that he could settle in to be kind of like what Kyle Seager is, right? Like a 240,
formidable.
325, 465 type of player. I think that's in his range of outcomes. So I would say to myself, imagine a switch hitting Corey Seager and bid accordingly.
I like it. I like it a lot. We won't hit on everything, but I did want to hit on this one. Chicago White Sox. This one was something else. First, they go and get Cesar Hernandez. Great. They needed a second baseman. As much as you want to like Leury Garcia, it's hard to like him full time. Like, he's a good kind of utility player, not an everyday play second baseman. Hernandez fits that mold. Then they go and they get Ryan Tepera on Thursday. They're thinking, great, good setup man for Liam Hendricks. Everything's going awesome. And then the splash happened that shook me to the core, because in almost all my leagues, I either have Craig Kimbrel or Liam Hendricks. And now they're on the same team. This was like the worst case scenario out of all the 29 other teams to trade with. He sent them here, at least for me. How do you assess this now? Like, obviously, there's been issues. I made the joke, Giolito can't get a win because the bullpen keeps blowing it. But, man, you have two of the best closers this season in baseball on the same roster now.
Yeah, I was on a podcast a couple of weeks ago with Michael Salfino on the Breakfast Table podcast. We're doing a getting ready for the trade deadline podcast. And I said that on a team that I have that's contending, I wasn't sure what to do with Kimbrel, because I could imagine him going to the Dodgers, where he might not close in front of Jansen unless something happened to Jansen. And I said that I think Chicago wants to trade him. And there might be another team that would trade him where he wouldn't close. I think most teams would close with him, but maybe it's possible that he could get moved to a team where I think what's going to happen is both these guys are going to get situations, but again, that could be fluid, right? I mean, if Hendricks blows 2 in a row and Kimbrel converts 2 in a row, maybe La Russa says, okay, Kimbrel's the guy, that could happen. Certainly in your situation, your unique situation of having both of them, this is the last thing you want, because now your upside is capped, unless the White Sox go on a 17-2 run or something like that. How many saves can you get? I was surprised. I thought Kimbrel would get traded. I didn't think it was going to be to Chicago. I admire that the team still make trades. I mean, obviously the Cubs were burned by trading Eloy Jimenez to the White Sox for the perennial disappointment that is Jose Quintana. You know, he's had a nice career, but he never really grew into that Cy Young contender that a lot of people thought he could be. And, you know, Jimenez, you know, health willing. And man, it's just great to see him playing again. I know he's a little
just the joy he had. He got a single and was celebrating like it was Little League.
Yeah,
It was awesome.
I loved it. This is a fun team. Before the season, I said that the Blue Jays and the White Sox were just the most fun teams in baseball. And you know, I'm a big Tim Anderson guy. He's a fun player. Jimenez is a fun player. It was interesting to get Hernandez, a switch hitter, who his whole career it's been like, okay, I'll make contact, hit for a reasonable average, maybe hit 8 to 12 home runs. This year, it's like, no. I'm just going to go for the downs and hit for a lousy average, and I'm going to hit 27 home runs. I didn't see that coming from Cesar Hernandez, but I guess I should have seen once they acquired him. I guess I should have seen that maybe the things were in motion where Madrigal wouldn't be on the team through the deadline. This is a fun trade because now we get to see if Madrigal ends up turning into an all-star or something, he can help. Maybe he can haunt the White Sox the way you would think Jimenez is going to haunt the Cubs. But I feel your pain. I have a team where I needed Kimbrel to be a full-time closer. I can't imagine he's a full-time closer now unless everything goes right. And now, granted, he was having trouble getting saves on a Cubs team that hadn't been winning games a lot of late, but he had a great season. So it's tough. It's one thing when you have Rodriguez of the Pirates and you say, hey, you should have seen this coming. And, you know,
or Ian Kennedy or any of these guys. Yeah.
Right, yeah. You expect that. But when somebody who could be winning a Rolaids Relief Award gets traded, maybe out of a closer gig, it's a tough pill to swallow. It's really hard to come up with that ahead of time.
Yeah, no, that was a tough one. I'm sitting there like, even LA, I'm like, well, we've seen how they kind of give Jansen breaks and, you know, you can fall into some saves and you can make things work in that scenario. I'm like, okay, I can live with that. This literally looks like, okay, this is like, and then you're trusting Tony La Russa to make decisions. We've seen how that goes. So this is going to be a wild one. If you had to speculate, like I saw Jeff Erickson tweeting about it, it's been a common conversation piece. Chafin's gone, Tepera's gone, Kimbrel's gone. Rowan Wick is rehabbing. He'd seem like the main guy once he's back. But and the Cubs, like you mentioned, they're struggling to win. Period. Who would you speculate there if you needed to try to speculate on saves?
Dan Winkler, Rex Brothers. I really don't know.
It's brutal. Yeah.
I guess Winkler because he's right-handed.
Yeah.
I don't have a great answer to that. It's the right question to ask.
Yeah.
And let's put it this way: in my first come first serve leagues, which I'm trying to phase out, I didn't go out and grab any Chicago reliever. I'm fine if somebody else went out and grabbed somebody and got the right answer. They're a better man than I am.
Yeah, it feels like the Royals all year, where now they have 3 guys with 5 saves each. It's like that's just a losing battle, like you kind of said with the White Sox. Now it's like you put one guy out and then he gets no saves, and you take him out and he goes and gets all the saves. It's a disaster right there.
Do you feel is there whether it's Anthony Bender or whether it's maybe Bednar in Pittsburgh, is there one guy who you feel like clearly, okay, all systems go, this guy just graduated into a full-time closer?
I'd say Bednar in Pittsburgh is kind of the one I would lean towards if I had to go that way. I think in Miami, talking to some different guys that pay way more attention to closing situations than I do in recent weeks, Floro seems like a popular name there.
Okay.
Dylan Floro. He seems like a guy that, as much as we want Bender to take over that role, it feels like somehow Floro might down on some. So we'll have to see how that plays out. I think Bednar would be my Pittsburgh situation, and then Bednar would be the Pittsburgh one. But then the other fun one I'll throw out there, another bad team, of course, the Texas Rangers now without Ian Kennedy. Like, is it Spencer Patton? Because I thought it'd be Joey Rodriguez, and he's obviously gone. So that's
right. Yeah, I knew when you said bad team, I knew you were going to say Texas or Washington. Washington, because they've just everything has been everything must go.
But that seems like Finnegan at least. That seems Finnegan.
Yeah, Finnegan seems like the guy there.
Yeah.
I'm hoping that Texas is bad enough that I can live a comfortable, full, satisfying life without having anybody there. But maybe Spencer Patton, maybe, I don't know.
Yeah, it's tough. It's like it's one of those like, okay, on Sunday I'll put $1 bid out there. If no one else bids on it, well, whatever. But I'm not going out there and throwing lots of money that direction. But it'll be tricky, I think. And we're not going to talk about any of this, but I think it's going to be fun. I've seen discussion between some really good fantasy players on Twitter. People in AL and NL only leagues, they have all kinds of options this week. Things just got really interesting compared to most years. Like we talked about how kind of boring sometimes the deadline is. Some of the big names crossed borders, and that's where it's going to get real interesting this weekend. So
hey,
we'll see how that goes.
all you can ask is for you want things to be interesting, and you know, we've had a lot of interesting time. Even the NBA, you just had their draft. They just had a huge Russell Westbrook trade. I mean, you know, there's all free agency, all sorts of moves going in hockey. You know, the Vezina Trophy winner was traded in the NHL. I mean, it's a great time to be alive in the 2021 sporting world.
Yeah, it is. And we'll wrap it up with that. One of these days, I got to sit and talk to you about golf. I know you're a big golf guy. I love golf. That's like my second thing. So that's always fun. But I do appreciate you giving me some time talking about the trade deadline, which was just is bonkers. It was absolutely crazy. So, Scott, thanks for joining me. And plug away all your stuff, like Yahoo Fantasy and everything. But tell me exactly what you got going on.
Thanks so much for having me, Bubba. Yeah, find my work at Scott_Pianowski on Twitter. I'm one of the rotating hosts of the Yahoo Fantasy Football Forecast, which is our fantasy football podcast. And you can catch that. I think I'm the Sunday night host going forward. And then we'll be doing handicapping during the season. We'll be doing pickups during the season, weekly previews. I'm not involved in every part of that, but hopefully I'll give you some winning picks this year and some winning waiver spots. And we have for a very modest fee, the Breakfast Table podcast is something I do on the side with Michael Salfino. We've been doing that for, I don't know, 10, 12, 15 years. I forget the actual mileage on the odometer, but that's a really fun show that does baseball and football as well. And of course, if you're looking for a place to run your league, whether it's play a DFS contest, run a best ball league, or run a traditional fantasy league, the designers at Yahoo Sports win all sorts of awards for their apps and for their game platforms. So I strongly recommend you check those out. And you know, whatever your sport is, whether you're a baseball guy, football guy, basketball, hockey, golf, doesn't matter. You know, it's all playable at Yahoo Sports.
Yeah, I still have a few of every sport, or at least football and baseball, on Yahoo that I've had forever, and it is legit the only app that really still works for fantasy sports. So that's a beautiful thing about it. But once again, Scott, thanks for joining me. I appreciate it, and we'll have to do this again sometime.
Anytime, Bubba. It was a blast, and you know, it's good talking baseball with you. Let's go see what happens tonight. Let's go try to figure out like 5 bullpens that we don't understand right now.
Yeah, the Fab Sunday is going to be a blast. That's all I know.
Yeah, I'm going to need the whole day off. You know, it's a big X. Don't ask me to do anything on Sunday. I'm going to be making bids all day.
It's going to be absolutely crazy, baby. Make sure you check him out on Twitter at Scott_Pianowski and over at Yahoo Fantasy. This was Benched with Bubba, episode 389. Catch you guys next time.